Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I am Sarah Hansen, and I will be doing the program tonight about What's in a Name, Part 2. This is actually part of a multi-part series, as you'll hear about as we go. Part 1 was about the downtown area, and this will take us downtown White Bear Lake area, and this will take us a little bit further to the south and west a bit as we branch out. And then just a few acknowledgements. We'd like to thank the Ramsey County Library because, of course, this is a program partnership that we have with them to do these monthly programs. And so we appreciate the partnership and the support through the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment that helps pay for portions of these programs and the overall program series and systems that the library has as well. So tonight we'll go ahead, as I said, I'm Sarah Hansen, and we'll go ahead and jump into What's in a Name Part 2. This will cover Cottage Park, the Gardenette area, and then Yost Park, Columbia Park, and Ramaley Park on the sort of west side of the downtown area. So I'll give you a little bit of background, and actually I'd like to offer two more quick acknowledgements. One for Dan Jones, who is a Historical Society member who is also very tech savvy and wonderful with the designs and things. And so many of our maps and images and the way they've been presented tonight have come from Dan and his efforts to make things look pretty. We've got lots of information, but he tends to jazz it up for us and make it look appealing. And then some research assistance from Joel Holstad, who is also a member of the Historical Society and has been wonderful helping answer some questions from a technical standpoint on property records and things. So without that, we would be not able to share some of the stories we have. So we appreciate that as well. So as you can imagine, we are often asked why a street is named something or why a park is named what it is, or the lake, or whatever features. And sometimes those answers are fairly obvious. Birch Lake had a lot of birch trees around it, for example. But sometimes those answers are a little tougher, and this is always fun for us because sometimes those answers aren't really what they seem or what we would think to begin with. So that's always a little bit of a treat. We do have a lot of, it sounds like a fairly small area tonight, but there are a lot of streets and a lot of things. So we'll go sort of quickly through some of them. Much of our information comes from maps and things. So like you see here, and as you layer over them, you can find all sorts of additional information, but most or all of the areas we will talk about today are in White Bear Township, historic White Bear Township, which has then become the cities of White Bear Lake, Gem Lake, Vadnais Heights, and North Oaks. We will be covering portions of the city of White Bear Lake and White Bear Township today. So this is the original White Bear Town, or portion of the original White Bear Township you're seeing in this map, and a little bit of basically what became Grant Township Lincoln Township on the east side. So, but again, as we layer the modern over the earlier maps, you can see how some things have changed and some have not. And we use all sorts of interesting sources. This map actually is from the 1850s. It's the original survey map, which doesn't have a ton of actual information, or it has lots of information, but doesn't have a ton of useful information as far as naming things from our purposes, other than the fact that the surveyor's notes include a lot of information on vegetation and plant life and the ground, whether it was hilly or flat or marshy or that sort of thing. And so of course that gives clues to a lot of the natural type names that would come along with things. When Minnesota became a state in 1858, our townships and counties were also redefined. And so things started to really take shape that way. And so a lot of our names can come from that type of information as well. And then for us here locally, this sort of zooms in a little bit more on where we're talking about. But locally, the area marked with the pink boundaries was actually the original village of White Bear that was incorporated in 1881 out of historic White Bear Township. So if you can envision, this is where the city of White Bear Lake started, but it was the village of White Bear to begin with. And we'll talk a little bit as we go about why that is important, or how that changed the namings of certain things. And then this is one of our favorite maps, actually. This one comes from the early 1900s, and we love it because it actually shows the entire lake. So you can see sort of the faded line down the center there. that shows this is actually the boundary between Washington County on the east side and Ramsey County on the west. And so for us at the Historical Society, because we represent all of the communities around the lake on all sides, this one is always kind of fun because typically we have to deal with one atlas, one county atlas or the other to get that information and so to be able to put it together at this time period. And of course, it has a lot of detail with the plats and the some of the structures, the schools and other public structures and things. So it's always kind of interesting to see what's what. So we will go ahead and jump in. Our first section or our first area we'll talk about tonight is the Cottage Park and Gardenette neighborhoods, which you can see outlined here. Of course, this is White Bear Lake, the large body of water over here. This is Goose Lake. This is Highway 61 running north and south, roughly. And this is the Gardenette section that we'll focus on. As I said, we did, part one actually did the downtown area. So just basically to the north, the business district, if you will. And then we will continue to do additional parts as we go. So the Cottage Park area, as you can see on the survey map for this portion, it doesn't have a lot of information, not a lot of additional information, but still kind of interesting to see how things were sectioned out. As we jump to 1859, it's interesting to see the roads are starting to come in. There are indications of settlement, I guess is the best way to put it. And so it's always kind of fun to be able to see that. And then the big jump, by 1874, we have the railroad that has come through town over on the left here. We have hotels listed. We have the lakes obviously named. We have a cemetery. We have all sorts of things, developing roads and all sorts of infrastructure, if you will, taking place. So things happened very, very quickly within about 20 years, happened very, very quickly around the lake. So by 1882, you can see that Cottage Park is nestled between Goose Lake and White Bear Lake, right over here. The interesting piece of that is that Cottage Park was actually incorporated or settled, not incorporated as a community, but as an association to be a neighborhood, a private neighborhood. And so on some of the maps, you'll see that it actually talks about private roads. And it really was essentially a gated community where there was a clubhouse that you see here. We'll see in just a moment. And everything was taken care of within the community itself. On the north or west end of Cottage Park, today we have Lions Park, which is an actual park just across from Kowalski's. The park is named Lions Park for a fairly simple reason that it is the White Bear Lake Lions Club that supports the park, helps maintain it. It is a City of White Bear Lake Park, but it is sort of adopted by the White Bear Lake Lions Club. And so they build structures and donate funds to help maintain that park. And it's been that way since the 1970s. The park actually was, or I'm sorry, the Lions Club, it was actually formed in 1946 here in White Bear Lakes, and they've been active ever since. So on that site originally, or I shouldn't say originally, but previously was the Amundsen Boat Works and the Ramaley Boat Works. So there is a plaque out there for the Amundsen Boat Works where a little bit further on the north edge or the western edge of the park. You can see that right along the walking trail. And then the Ramaley Boat Works, which you see here, was actually at the opposite end of the park. It's not a very big park. So yes, there were two boatworks combined in that relatively small space. But you see that at Ramaley Park, or Ramaley, sorry, at the other end of Lions Park, basically where the parking lot is. Interestingly, the Ramaley Boat Works was there for many years, and you'll hear quite a bit about the Ramaley family this evening. But the Ramaley Boat Works was probably the smaller of the three big boat builders here in White Bear. And they also had operations at Lake Minnetonka and out in Excelsior and Wayzata. So they headed out that way. The family headed out that way by the 1920s or so. And they decided actually to turn their boatworks building into a nightclub, into a dance hall. And that was very common for large barns or warehouses or things like that, particularly during Prohibition. Folks found a way to benefit, as if you will, a bit from the Prohibition era and started applying for dance hall permits and that sort of thing. And so Rameli's decided to do exactly that with their Boatworks building initially. And it was so popular and so profitable that first year that they decided to take their Boatworks building and turn it into, actually rebuild it as the Plantation nightclub. So you can see they had here earlier on, and then as the years went on, they had a couple of different names, Rameli's Winter Garden, and ultimately the Plantation. And the Plantation was a really popular place, particularly for the 1930s era gangsters who would hang out at White Bear. So it had kind of a notorious reputation, if you will, but started out as the site of one of the boatworks in town. So here you see an aerial view from about 1932. So during that kind of heyday of the Plantation, and the building you see at the bottom or toward the bottom is actually the Plantation nightclub. This photo is interesting for a number of reasons, not the least of which being the fact that the Cottage Park Clubhouse is shown here. So as I said, they had a clubhouse, we'll see in a second. Lions Park was down in this vicinity. This is actually the parking lot area basically. And then the road that runs right through here comes right in between the trees. You can kind of see, and you can kind of make out the street here as well. We'll see a map in just a second to kind of give you a better perspective on that. But Cottage Park was simply named Cottage Park because it was precisely that, cottages all along in the park area, in a park-like area. This was 1932, so off in the distance in the upper left here, you see White Bear Lake doing okay. The water was fairly low at that point. The lake level was fairly low. And over here, you see Goose Lake completely dry. This was during the Dust Bowl era and the droughts that were happening. And so Goose Lake was absolutely dry. Interestingly, this small line is actually the streetcar line, the streetcar tracks that run right along the edge of Goose Lake. So had it been full of water, there are some interesting stories, I guess, that come along with that. And we're trying to figure that out a little bit because as we go, you'll see some blueprints and things that show that it really did go out into the lake area. So we're trying to figure out why on earth they would do that other than they didn't have a lot of space along the road. So we'll see how that goes as we show you here. The Cottage Park Clubhouse is what you're seeing now. And you can see the little turret or little tower that was peeking out above the trees. Interestingly, a portion of this house still exists in Cottage Park. There is actually a hexagonal shaped home, or at least the end of it is hexagonal. And so that is actually part of the Cottage Park Clubhouse that still stands on the original lot. And then the remainder of the building has been pulled away to be used for other things and has disappeared. This was fairly common. There was a clubhouse also on Manitou Island, which was sort of settled at the same time, about the same time, early 1880s. And the idea was that neighbors would gather for their meals, they would gather for social events and things like that. And a lot of the cottages that were built at that time did not have summer kitchens or did not have kitchens at all. They were summer homes. And so they might have a summer kitchen somewhere else on the lot, but typically they tried to avoid bringing the heat of the cooking and the fire danger from cooking into the cottages themselves and tried to keep that contained in these clubhouse areas. These didn't last long. The Manitou Island Clubhouse ended up being used for other things fairly quickly, being rented out, and then eventually was burned and didn't survive. And the Cottage Park Clubhouse actually over the years became a hotel and a hospital in a variety of ways, used for a few other things, lunch place or restaurant, and kind of morphed through a number of things before it became a private home. Some of the names are pretty obvious and some less so, but Cottage Park is one of those that just makes a lot of sense. So the road, big red question mark here, is essentially Cottage Park Road as it stands today. And then you see this one, which is another line that goes down. This is actually Circle Drive for the same obvious reasons. It goes around in a circle. Interestingly, Lions Park would have sat up here. The road comes down around, Cottage Park Road comes down around here. The clubhouse sat right at the corner here. So when you come into into Cottage Park, you would take a right onto Circle and be able to come down there and see the private home that was part of the clubhouse. So this is one of our other resources, and this is actually a blueprint from the streetcar company. The Twin City Rapid Transit Company had streetcars running all over the Twin Cities, but particularly interesting for us in this program are the ones that ran from Wildwood Amusement Park on the Mahtomedi shore through Birchwood and around the west side of the lake into downtown White Bear. And so what you see here is the blueprint as it's printed. We'll actually invert it or flip it. So of course the words are upside down, but this gives a little bit more comfortable feel for what we've been looking at otherwise. So Lions Park would be over here in this vicinity. White Bear Lake is up here. Goose Lake is down here. And what's interesting is it shows, because it is the streetcar company map, it shows the stops for the streetcar company. And so we have a stop here at Cottage Park down by basically South Shore Boulevard, and then a stop here for the Lakeshore Sanitarium. The Lakeshore Sanitarium would have sat, it was actually one of the uses of the clubhouse building. So it would have sat right up here in the corner. And again, it shows that these streets are private streets because this was actually a private community and it was not, they were not considered to be public streets. So as we come back out of Cottage Park, if you will, and go along the shore or near the shore of Goose Lake, we are at Old White Bear Avenue, which still runs along the lake or near the lake. It is actually what many would refer to as the frontage road that runs along what we think of as White Bear Avenue today. But Old White Bear Avenue was the original street that went along there. Interestingly, that is this street, or basically this street coming along here. And then White Bear Avenue as we know it, the multi-lane road, which you see here, almost brand new, was put in about 1959, 1960, particularly for the shopping center, as this whole area was being redeveloped. So essentially, the idea was to go around and connect folks to Highway 61 and draw the traffic out this way, instead of pulling it through along by where the boatworks were and where Tally's and the VFW and all of that is today. This used to be known as White Bear Avenue over on the frontage road, if you will. And interestingly, was actually at one point, or has had several names, I guess I should say, not necessarily at one point, but has been the White Bear and Lake Phalen Road, the White Bear and St. Paul Road. And it was not uncommon to name roads for where they took you, which you'll see on a few of these as we go. And so that was pretty typical, but they saved it as Old White Bear Avenue when they redid in 1959. And before I go on, you will notice that they actually did fill in the lake. There was not, they actually had to fill part of Goose Lake to put the road bed in there. So a lot of that has been filled in. If you look at other photos and maps over the years, the shore came pretty darn close over to the road over here, like we saw with the streetcar line. So the next piece that's always kind of interesting is the Mark Sather Trail. And the Mark Sather Trail is what runs along Lake Avenue. So this is South Lake Avenue up here, and all the way along Old White Bear Avenue up to South Shore Boulevard right now. And then, of course, as part of the Lake Links Trail, it will continue on around South Shore and out that way. And Mark Sather Trail was actually named for former White Bear Lake City Manager Mark Sather, who was here for over 30 years as our city manager and retired in 2015. The trail was originally just the Lake Avenue Trail. And when it was improved in 2007, it was enlarged and changed as part of the reconstruction of Lake Avenue. And then it was named for Mark Sather in a presentation right before he retired in 2015. So that's a fairly new change or addition. And then, well, we're in this area also, we have St. John in the Wilderness Cemetery. And this one is a little bit tough to sort of make out. You can see the square down here, but it's sort of interesting. And you'll see why as we go on and look at some of the streets as we get a little deeper into it. But the cemetery itself is here. This is our oldest cemetery in town. It was started in 1861, and it really started as part of the churchyard. St. John in the Wilderness Church was originally located on this spot. was actually land owned by Laura and John Aubrey, who you see on the left-hand side there, who were folks who came to town. They actually came from England and came by way of Superior, Wisconsin, and made their way down here and purchased land essentially between Goose and White Bear Lakes. They donated the property for the church, and the church was built there. They helped get the church built, raised funds to help get the church built. And they also had their home, which was built in 1857, which still stands in Cottage Park today. They used their home as the first school for the community. Laura Aubrey was not a trained teacher, but she was an educated woman. And so she actually volunteered and taught students or kids from the area in their own home. And that is the oldest home in White Bear that we know of that is still standing. It's actually dated to 1857. So they weren't here for a particularly long time. They actually went back to England in the 1860s, but while they were here, they made a significant impact with our first school and our first church. So, and of course, when the railroad came through in 1868, the town started to develop on the other side of the bay, the town of White Bear. And so folks decided to pick up that church and actually move it across the ice, across the frozen lake, and put it on Clark Avenue. And the current building that is there for St. John in the Wilderness today was actually constructed in 1926. So the original church was a smaller frame building, but made its way over that way. As we continue our way on, we'll head a little bit east here. And what you see here, there actually wasn't a street marked here initially, at least on this particular map. But what you see here is Lakeview Avenue marked in red. Lakeview for obvious reasons. But it gets interesting because you can see it here. And again, we are flipped. This is a streetcar map or streetcar blueprints. And so we're going to flip it over, make you dizzy a little bit. But we have White Bear Lake here, Goose Lake here, basically to the north at the top of the screen. And so you see Lakeview Avenue, which is essentially how it is today from here to here. Interestingly, this continuation is actually what we would think of as South Shore Boulevard today, but it is named Lakeview Avenue at this point in this particular map, and does not continue on like it does today all the way to Goose Lake. So that is where one sort of point that can help you get oriented is the cemetery again. See it here. Cemetery is at the corner of South Shore Boulevard and White Bear Avenue. So kind of fun to be able to see. Interestingly, South Shore Boulevard has had many names over the years, and that was just one of them. But you see Lakeview Avenue again here, and then it continues on as it goes down. This would be roughly where McKnight Road is and around down by the bay there, and you see it as Schneider's Road on this map. And then, and you can see again another name. This is Lakeside Avenue. So South Shore Boulevard has had quite a few different possible names to go by. And then as it continues to the east, it actually picks up a couple of other names as time goes on. The Schneider's Road and a couple of the other names to the east make some sense when you consider the property owners as you go. All of this land you can see down below here was owned by the Schneider family, and it was part of the Schneider farm. So there is some logic there. And of course, as you saw on the map, the bay down here, which is just to the east of McKnight Road, is actually Schneider's Bay, or known as Schneider's Bay, at least locally. So it's kind of fun to be able to understand why that might be. So here we have McKnight Road, which was interesting in its own right, because McKnight Road itself isn't too tough to figure out. It was originally named, McKnight Road connects all the way down through Maplewood and into St. Paul. And it was actually originally named East Street in St. Paul, and then was renamed McKnight by the St. Paul City Council in that portion in 1957 in honor of William L. McKnight, who was a longtime 3M employee. He was actually started as, I believe, a bookkeeper and worked his way up and through, and ended up becoming president of the company, and then essentially chairman of the board from 1949 to 1966 before he retired. McKnight had a home in Delwood, and a number of the 3M executives had homes in the area. And so as the road continued on, it was eventually put all the way through to the lake. they continued the name and brought it into White Bear and to the south end of the lake. Interestingly, one of the anecdotes that we've heard many times when we talk about the building boom, particularly on the south side of the lake in the 1950s, 1960s in particular, post-World War II building boom, is that at that time, McKnight in particular pushed to have folks move out to White Bear, to the south side of White Bear Lake, who worked at 3M. So people who were interviewing or people who were interested in working there were often directed or encouraged to check out this area, which is kind of a fun piece and connection to 3M. So a lot of folks have retired. A lot of community people who are still around have retired from 3M over the years and been a part of that organization. So it's kind of interesting to see those large numbers. Some of the names, as we said, are fairly obvious and not too shocking, but some provide some mysteries. And so Lilac Lane, probably pretty basic, probably had a nice patch of lilacs, or someone liked lilacs when they were setting the names as they went. But at least in the 1918 blueprints, it is actually labeled as Woodbine Avenue. And you'll notice a number of others, Oriole and Linden, Elm and Forest, and some of these appear in other plats or other areas of the city in later times. But the one that struck us as particularly interesting is Woodbine, which is again marked for lilac. Sorry, getting all of my names confused as I go. Again, to give you sort of that reference, the roads down below Lakeview and Lake Avenue, which is a whole nother one that sort of throws us off, and then Woodbine as lilac, one block south of South Shore Boulevard, ends up being particularly intriguing. It is a plant as well. Woodbine is a plant as well. And it's particularly intriguing to us because we have this stereo card from 1874 that is labeled Camp Woodbine. Now it's clearly labeled White Bear Lake. You can see that over here. And the reverse side of it actually has an advertisement for the South Shore House, which is a hotel over in Cottage Park at one time. So kind of an interesting piece and makes one wonder what the Woodbine piece is, if that was just a coincidence or if that was taken somewhere along the way. I did try to do some research on the names listed on the photo. The only ones that I could come up with anything somewhat definitive, because they were more unique, are the Leonori names over on the left here. The Leonoris owned a hat making company down in St. Louis. And the others I was not able to pinpoint at this point anyway. So if anyone knows anything about them, it would be fun to be able to figure out what the story is behind that particular photo. So also interesting is Floral Avenue. And again, probably fairly obvious, fairly simple, a pretty name for a nice place. So nothing too crazy to digest or dissect. And then we have Hazel, which runs north and south. This is one that we have a little bit of a debate on. It is interesting because there is a Hazel in St. Paul that runs north and south and is parallel to White Bear Avenue, which runs just to the east, if you will. So here we have Hazel, and then here's White Bear Avenue. Interestingly, Van Dyke is also there. And that as we continue further south in White Bear, we have a Van Dyke that runs between the two as well. But when you line up the maps, they do curve and twist and turn a little bit, and they're not exactly lined up as far as heading straight north and straight south. Now, of course, the curves happen, but so it's probably something as simple as carrying on those streets, but it's interesting that they chose to carry those on and not some of the others as time goes on. So as we get into Hazel and some of those areas, the other piece that gets a little bit intriguing is seeing the original plat. So this is Gardenette Park, the area just to the south of South Shore Boulevard. So we actually have South Shore Boulevard right here. And you can see White Bear Avenue over here to give you a little bit of orientation. We have Gardenette Drive North and Gardenette Drive South to make the lovely loop around here. But this would be Hazel coming through, and then we cut over that way and then come down, and you'll see that it's marked Bellevue. Again, not a particularly distinctive name, but kind of an interesting piece that for whatever reason never stuck or never took. But and then you can see Floral and County Road F, which is not too surprising. And here's what it actually looked like in Gardenette Park shortly before it was developed. You can see the road is there, the roads are there, they're going in, and they are probably just getting ready to start building. I would imagine that's part of why the photo was taken. So you can see White Bear Avenue curving around over here, South Shore coming along this way, right through here, and then of course the loops for Gardenette. A little bit fancy. Most of the streets here were pretty straight and simple, but Gardenette Park got a little bit fancy for us. It was actually developed by Gus Axelrod, who you see here in the back on the right. Gus is with his brothers Max and Jay, standing in the back, and they are standing behind their parents, Martin and Gertrude Axelrod. So Martin and Gertrude and there's 3 sons actually lived in St. Paul and came out, and Gus came out and developed the Gardenette Park area. Martin was a Russian immigrant to Minnesota and had all sorts of different business dealings going on, and Gus sort of followed in his footsteps. So as you can see, the Gardenette Park plat or Gardenette Park neighborhood was carved out of part of the Schneider farm again, as we sort of overlay it with that, but kind of fun to be able to see how these all take shape as time goes on. The next piece that's sort of interesting, and again, not particularly shocking, although much more unique, often names come from those who plat the area or develop the area. And so Rishworth is kind of a fun one. It's a small little cul-de-sac that comes off of White Bear Avenue toward Goose Lake. And it was platted by Thomas and Alice Rishworth. And here we see Thomas Rishworth's 1920 passport photo. I couldn't find one for Alice, but Tom Rishworth's 1920 passport photo that is out in the records on Ancestry. And so we were able to at least get a face there to go with that. Interestingly, Rishworth was platted as Richland Acres, or part of Richland Acres. And so you see the cul-de-sac here. This is the original plat that was completed in 1942. So one of the very early, it wasn't even post-war, it was still during World War II, but one of the very early areas platted and set out and ready for development as the community was starting to grow. Interestingly, Richland Acres, this particular plat, is one of the first areas when communities or neighborhoods were looking to be annexed into the city of White Bear Lake because they wanted water service and sewer service and different things, and wanted to be part of the city as opposed to the township that did not have those services at the time. And Richland Acres was one of the very first that did that. There have been over 100 annexations into the cities of White Bear Lake, Badness Heights, and other municipalities out of White Bear Township, and Richland Acres was one of the earliest in the kind of beginning of things happening in 1956. There was sort of a wave of them after that point. And so it's kind of fun to be able to pinpoint exactly where that is. Richland Acres was a replatting of the original plat of White Bear Park, which we see here. White Bear Park was platted by Nathaniel and Clara Langford in 1886, so quite a few years before, more than 50 years before. And one of the things that's kind of fun here, you may have noticed on the map a moment ago, and then of course, we'll call it out here, but they're referring to Goose Lake as Little Bear Lake. And then in the description, they're actually saying that portion lying south of Little Bear or Goose Lake to be surveyed and platted, da 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 da. As far as we know, Little Bear Lake was never legally entered in there, and it actually shows as Goose Lake back and forth, or as early as the 1870s. So Goose Lake was definitely recognized at that time and is officially what the DNR recognizes the lake as. In fact, today it is split in Goose Lake, the original Goose Lake is now split in half, and it's Goose Lake and Little Goose Lake. But Little Bear Lake sounds kind of fun. They also took it another step further and had a street all along the edge of Goose Lake, which is definitely not there today. And then Little Bear Avenue, which I presume would have been Rishworth, is here. and they were calling County Road F Rutland Avenue. So kind of an interesting change that never really took hold, and often we find that to be the case, but interesting to see it all pieced together. White Bear Park, or this rearrangement of White Bear Park, again, with the Little Bear Lake up here, was done in 1915. And again, here actually they're referring to County Road F as Ash Street, and some other streets as we go on. You can see Birch, which is more recognizable. And so things do change, and just because they're on paper doesn't necessarily mean that they've taken hold in the community, but it's always kind of interesting to see what's what. Right across the way, basically across, or as the curves go around White Bear Avenue, they're a little curvier and less jagged than they look on here, but today. But we have Douglas Lane, which is just a little loop here, a little horseshoe. And Douglas Lane was platted by the Ackerman family, Keith and Bernadine Ackerman, in 1959. Interestingly, we don't know for sure why it was named Douglas Lane, but the Ackermans had a son named Kirk Douglas, that they named Kirk Douglas Ackerman in 1957 or so. And so we're thinking there's a family tie there, probably a family connection that combines or connects those dots for us. So, and of course, White Bear Avenue as it curves around and comes around the lake there. As mentioned before, it has had a number of names, and as depending on where you are located on it, it can change as well. But the most common that you hear is the White Bear and Lake Phalen Road, for obvious reasons. It takes you by Lake Phalen. Sometimes it's the St. Paul and White Bear Road for the same purpose or same reason. And of course, today it's been simplified for many years as White Bear Avenue, and just sort of keeps it that way. Keeps it simple. But again, it continues all the way into St. Paul. You can see Minnehaha crossing it here, all the way down into St. Paul. And again, with Van Dyke and Hazel and some of the other more recognizable names, even Kennard bringing it up into Maplewood and some of the others. So those ties do connect us back and forth through a lot of those areas. County Road F is about as simple as it can be, although you've seen some of the possible other options that have popped up over the years as a potential name. Some of the county roads do have other names. We'll see Highway 96 is actually County Road G, legally or officially, and you'll see a couple of the other possibilities that have popped up for it over the years. But for the most part, County Road F, at least in our area, remains as County Road F. So nothing too creative there. We'll actually wrap up this end of, or this portion, this area, before we jump over to the Romele Park area, with a few aerial photos, because these are just really kind of fun to show the changes in a matter of a couple of decades. So as I've said, there was a huge building boom from 1950 to 1970 or so. The population of the city of White Bear Lake quadrupled during that time. And part of that had to do with the fact all of those annexations we were talking about. So interestingly, the Cottage Park neighborhood again is here. You see this in 1940. Goose Lake is still feeling the drought and the challenges from the 1930s. White Bear Lake has some shallow areas that you can see along here. This is South Shore Boulevard coming across here, Schneider's Bay. And this actually is the streetcar bed. The streetcars were taken out in 1932 or ceased to run in 1932 and were taken out in the 1930s. But this is actually the original track, or the bed anyway. So still visible in 1940. But as we flip through, we'll just go quickly through these, but you can see as things start to take shape and the water is much higher by 1947, things have filled back in. By 1953, the houses are coming. You can see the Gardenette Park taking shape and several of the other areas. And then of course, by 1957, many houses starting to fill in. And then what it looks like today with nice mature trees and other things filling in as well. So kind of a fun sort of flash through that time period. So as we jump a little bit to the north and a little bit to the west, we were down here. now we're going to hop up here and take a look at some of this area. There are a lot of ties between these two neighborhoods, and particularly between the boat builders. All of the boat builders along the lake, the Johnson, Amundsen, and Romali, who had their boat building, eventually had their boat building operations along the lake shore, lived over here in the neighborhood. And had there was a lot of connection between the two. There was the railroad tracks split the two, but definitely brought it back. So, and I mentioned Highway 96 here a moment ago. It's actually, there's a spelling error, but it's actually showing up on Google Maps and other places as Romali Street. There should be an extra A in there, but they're pulling Romali from something early on in the plat, and kind of fun to see. It is also, as I mentioned, County Road G, or has that designation over the years as well. So the survey map, again, not a lot of detail that helps us from a naming standpoint, other than this would be Birch Lake, for example, and there are recorded many birch trees, and we have tamarack up in the north area there that we'll talk about in another segment of the program, but kind of interesting to be able to see some of those things. You can see the roads starting to take shape in the 1850s. So they have figured out there's something fun to be had, or some fun to be had, and something interesting to see out here at White Bear. And so people started to arrive. And then, of course, within just a couple of decades, we are filling up, and the property is purchased, and farms and homes and all sorts of things are being added. So it's amazing how quickly it happens. This will be the main chunk of the next segment we're going to look at is Romali's Park. And as you can see, it was platted here. For those who may not be totally familiar, you may be familiar with Union Cemetery off of Highway 96, which is listed as Romali Avenue here. So this is Highway 96. And this is actually Lake Avenue and roughly Highway 61 along the railroad tracks in this particular map, but roughly Highway 61 coming along that way. And you can see a little bit, as I mentioned, the boat builders were over in this vicinity. The Romali's Pavilion, which was a huge resort building, hotel building, was over in this area, as were a number of other hotels down Lake Avenue and down by where Kowalski's is. And so being directly across the railroad tracks from all of this was beneficial for a number of reasons economically, and a really popular place for people who worked at all of these places to live. So no big surprise that they were able to pull in. It was an early developed area, and be able to pull in a lot of folks who wanted to buy homes there, rent homes there. So the Romali Pavilion, which you see here, was built in 1890 by J.D. Romali. He actually ran a lunchroom, or sort of lakeshore pavilion with sandwiches and things at the lakeshore that was owned by the railroad initially, and operated that for them, and then decided to purchase the property and actually build this vast hotel and spot here. Interestingly, and you could kind of see it on the previous map, but interestingly, the train depot, Lakeshore Depot, is right here. So it was convenient for the railroad to have their lunch counter and their space right there. It was certainly convenient for Romali as well. The building was built in 1890 at a cost of $40,000, and then furnished for another $35,000, so a total cost of $75,000. And sadly, didn't last past 1908. By 1908, the White Bear Press was calling for its demolition, and that it was an eyesore and not taken care of, and was in horrible disrepair. So it was a grand building for a very short time. And by that time in history, in our community anyway, the resorts and things were starting to fade. People were not taking the railroad as much as they had been previously. And so the investment was probably not as great a one. And for the Romali family themselves, Mr. Romali, J.D. Romali, was the father, was the patriarch, and there were three sons who were not as interested in that piece. They actually were in some of the other aspects of the business. And so as things went on, they started to fade a little bit. But as you can see, the pavilion was here. The Lakeshore station was here. And then the Romali home was actually right across the tracks over here. So nice and convenient. They could hop right across and get to things as they went. So Romali Park was set aside as part of the original plat. No big surprise, named for the Rameli family. Nothing particularly stunning there. And we'll start at the north end of the Platte and kind of work our way through. But again, they're all pretty logical names. Birch Lake Avenue actually takes you out to Birch Lake if you head directly west. It ends at Birch Lake, so that makes sense. Weber Avenue was named for William Weber, who was the owner of all of this land and actually all along the lakeshore area as well. Initially, he was a farmer. He was a steamboat captain who came to Minnesota because his health was bad, and he was told to come here and would recuperate and do well, and he liked it, so he stayed. But he owned all of this property at one point and farmed most of it. And he's actually the one who started Union Cemetery. He lost a wife and two of his three sons early on when they got here in the 1860s, and he buried them on the farm, which was fairly common practice. And then they eventually incorporated the cemetery and created a cemetery association, and it's grown over the years, and now actually includes this block or part of this block over here as well to the north. So in November of 1886, William and his second wife, Harriet Weber, actually sold the tract of land that has become Rameli's Park, and of course the Rameli Pavilion area to Mrs. Rameli, Sarah Rameli, J.D. Rameli's wife, and that's when they decided to plat and put this in. I jumped ahead a little bit with Union Cemetery, but so here is the full size of the cemetery today. They obviously maintained that and continued on. Now, Florence, Eugene, and Clarence are all named for the sons of the Rameli family. And yes, Florence is a son. I would have probably guessed otherwise, but looking at their family tree and going through their information, Florence was a man, and then Eugene and Clarence also. And then of course, Rameli Avenue, County Road G, or Highway 96, as we know it today, was sort of right in the middle of that. And so that's where they're, again, still pulling that information. As I mentioned before, the three sons actually picked up and moved out of the area for the most part. Eugene stayed, or J.E. Rameli, as in Eugene was his middle name that he used, stayed connected to the area through the plantation. He was the one who ran the plantation nightclub into the 1940s, early 1940s. But the other two really headed to the west side of the cities and didn't stick around. So as time went on, they ran the boatworks and other things over that way. And then Park Avenue, again, comes by the park, makes sense, connects the community to that park. So kind of interesting. Hinckley Avenue was a little bit of a surprise for us. We didn't realize, and initially there was some speculation if it was one of those destination sort of things, being close to the railroad tracks and whatnot, would it connect to Hinckley, Minnesota, or what was the tie there? Interestingly, when about the same time that the Webers were selling this land to the Ramelis, they sold a chunk of land down here where you see Merrimack Street to a gentleman named Herbert Hinckley. Hinckley had kind of the same situation as Weber. He had come to Minnesota. He lived elsewhere and had relocated. He lived in Massachusetts and relocated to Minnesota because his doctor told him he had a disease of the lungs and needed the clean and fresh air of a Minnesota lake area. So he came out this way and decided that he liked it, recuperated, did well. And so he ended up actually staying at one of the hotels for a time, and then marrying one of the daughters of the hotel keeper. It stayed in the area. Interestingly, he purchased this land and was setting up his home and all of his things along there. And then within just a couple of years of getting married and purchasing the land, he passed away. And so Hinckley Avenue was actually named for him and for he and his wife anyway. And Merrimack Street no longer exists. If you are familiar with this neighborhood or this area along the lake, this was actually absorbed by the Johnson Boatworks as time went on and would have run right through the middle of their shops or the middle of their pieces. We don't know why it was named Merrimack. There was a ship during the Civil War, a Confederate ship during the Civil War that was named the Merrimack, but we don't know if it's a reference to that or where that piece came from, but it has been vacated for many, many years, but kind of an interesting piece. as well. And then you'll notice as we continue down, you'll see South Avenue down here. South Avenue runs along what we know as Whitaker Street today, at least on this side of the tracks. It was originally South Avenue. It was at the south end of this section, section 23 in the plat, but or in the map, but it has not maintained the south name for quite some time. In fact, it shows up in a number of places as Whitaker. You can see it here with a little bit different alignment. You see Merrimack running across up here, and then Whitaker Street coming down this way instead of going across the tracks. Crossing the tracks was problematic, as you could probably guess, but coming down here. Interestingly, as you come along this way, you'll note that Bald Eagle Avenue is continued as an extension here as well. But Whitaker Street, which had this funny little dog leg to it, is more than likely named for the Whitaker family who was here. And here we see Frederick Whitaker and Louise Hardy Whitaker near the Manitou Island Bridge. And so we know it was named for them in general. Specifically, which one is a little bit harder for us to pinpoint, or we have not been able to pinpoint yet. Interestingly, Whitaker, as it continues on all the way out here to Otter Lake Road today, was not completed or not put all the way through until 1926. So that took quite a while to get that connection made. But so as we come along the railroad tracks here, you'll also, I showed you on the last map, it was actually labeled as an extension of Bald Eagle Avenue as it comes across 96 and down, which makes some sense. It was also at one time referred to as Railroad Avenue. You'll see in a lot of the census data, folks living along here were labeled as living along Railroad Avenue. And then of course you see it as Lincoln Avenue. It was, or that's what it is today. It was changed in 1909, and there wasn't a statement for reasoning of that. But I would speculate that 1909 was the 100th anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. And I would imagine that it was probably in honor of that. Washington Avenue used to be Railroad Avenue in downtown White Bear, and was actually renamed Washington Avenue in 1932 on the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. So it wouldn't be surprising at all if that was something that was done about that time. And of course, here we see Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president. It took a while for those things to take shape, and a few things still show up periodically as this being part of Bald Eagle Avenue as well. So it's a little bit interesting in that regard. And then we jump up a little bit over by Florence here again, and this would be 96. And you see Jack Yost Park. Doesn't quite come all the way across there, but you see Jack Yost Park tucked in there, and you see Jack Yost here in the photograph. Jack Yost actually was a longtime firefighter for White Bear. He joined the department in 1941 and served for 30 years. And he is best known as being the father of our rescue squad. Those were the early days of the rescue squad, and firefighters were transitioning heavily from knowing how to fight fires and all the science that goes behind that and all of the training they need, to shifting to knowing how to care for people and respond to emergencies and problems that come both from fires and of course medical situations and other things. Jack Yost is credited, at least locally for sure, as developing the Jaws of Life, the tools that help pry cars open and things. And if you've ever seen our fire department at different Market Fest or other events doing using the big hydraulics, those are obviously much more advanced, but there is actually an original or an early iteration of that, sort of a crowbar kind of piece that Yost developed. And he was nationally sought to go around and talk and train other departments and give talks on different techniques and things. So it wasn't just a local acknowledgement. He truly had a huge impact further beyond the White Bear community. So the park was named in his honor. And then one of the few pockets in this area that still is White Bear Township, is not the city of White Bear Lake, but remains part of White Bear Township, is Columbia Park. So again, along Highway 96 here. This is Columbia Park tucked in to the south of 96 in the township. Interestingly, Columbia Park was actually developed as a park for White Bear Township just within the last 20 years or so, and was named in honor of the Space Shuttle Columbia, which of course disintegrated upon its reentry into the Earth's atmosphere in February of 2003. And so it was at about that time that the park was being dedicated. And so the town board chose to use Columbia as its name in honor of that. And then one last piece really is Grace Avenue and Margaret Street, and these are both in White Bear Township, also running south from Highway 96. Interestingly, you'll notice that these street signs look different than all of the others you've been seeing. That is because it is in White Bear Township. An easy way to know if you are in and out of the township or the city as they cross back and forth here in White Bear is that the street signs in the township are brown, the street signs in the city are green. So if you're ever not certain, that'll help you figure that out. But Grace and Margaret Street they sort of section off that what was formerly the Dillon Farm, or one of the Dillon Farms. You can see land up here along Centerville Road as well. But this is actually their earlier farm. And you can see Grace and Margaret come down this way. This is the Michael Dillon Farm, and Mrs. Michael Dillon, Margaret Grace Flood Dillon, is the reason for the naming of the streets. So as they went on, they used her as their inspiration. That brings us to the end of part 2, and I am happy to answer any questions, Rihanna, if you have any.
I do actually have a couple. Can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. And by the way, those maps are just absolutely fabulous. I love looking at those.
Spent most of the last week inundated with them, but
right?
Fascinating.
And then the conversation and the difference between the green signs and the brown signs, and how long it took me to realize that. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's one of those sort of aha moments, but yeah.
Right.
So,
okay. So we have a couple questions from Brad right now. And he mentions that there was a book called On the Streets Where You Live that was from St. Paul. And he wanted to know whether or not there was a similar publication for the White Bear area. I said,
no. In fact, I used that for a few of the streets that connect us to St. Paul, and Hazel being one of them, which didn't have a particularly exciting story, but I love that book. I've got a couple of different copies over the years of it, but we don't have anything like that yet. You never know.
But could be an idea. I did mention that the Looking Back book and White Bear History do mention a lot of the street names, but not quite like that one. So next one, is there a resource or reproductions of those plat maps can be purchased?
So the short answer is yes, they're all public record. That's where it gets a little bit complicated, and that's where Joel has been wonderful. Joel Holstead, I mentioned at the beginning, has been wonderful helping to get electronic versions of them for us for some of them, because that's what he does in his world and is able to access a lot of that stuff. You can actually go down to the Resource Center at the Ramsey County Records Office, Land Records Office down on Plato, and they are public record. You can pull them up. There are copy fees and scan fees and that sort of thing, but they have been digitized, and they are available in that way. We don't have all of them, but it's one of those things that could probably be a rabbit hole I would go down for a couple of years, and you guys may never see me if I got that deeply into them. But it is possible.
So don't have a whole lot of questions right offhand. I mean, you went into some awesome detail on the area. So
no problem. So we're happy to also, of course, as always, if you do think of questions as you go or want to recommend future sections, we're going to try to work our way around the lake and kind of cover everywhere as we can. But please don't hesitate, particularly to shoot off an email to us at office@whitebearhistory.org. That's an easy way to sort of catch us, and we'll try to answer them as best we can. But
last one came in from Darlene. She wants to know if part 1 is available for viewing.
It is. It's on our YouTube channel. I'm not sure if it's made public at the moment, but we'll make sure it is, especially and this one has been recorded as well. So we will make sure that they both kind of get back out there if folks have missed it.
I'll throw it in a Facebook posting within the next day. How about that?
Okay.
It'll work.
Sounds perfect. Yeah, and this one may not be ready quite that quickly, but we'll get it out on a Facebook post as soon as we can too. We put Dan Jones to work on that, and he usually does them and cleans up all of my ums and ahs.
Absolutely.
So, but wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. We hope you enjoyed, and we're looking forward to getting to work on part 3, and we'll let you know as soon as we have a date set for that. So,
Awesome.
have a good night.